In a forgotten corner of a marketplace, a blind young woman is handed over by her own father in exchange for a sack of tobacco. No protests, no tears, only silence, but someone sees. An Apache, who was there trading pelts, approaches. 3 gestures, not a word, and everything changes. The crowd disperses, but what happens next transforms not only her destiny, but that of an entire village. Watch until the end and discover the power of an act that asked for nothing in return. Subscribe to the channel and learn about this true story of redemption. Dawn was barely breaking when the first sounds of the marketplace began to fill the air of Bom Jesus do Tocantins, a forgotten village in the depths of Pará state. Hurried footsteps mingled with the creaking of carts on the beaten earth, hoarse voices negotiating prices, coins changing hands with urgency. Among makeshift stalls of faded canvas and rough wood, the dense aromas of beiju flatbread, fried fish, and moist tobacco competed for space in the heavy air that foretold another day of intense heat. In the shadow of an abandoned warehouse that had once served the rubber boom, now taken over by termites and rotting memories, a scene unfolded that few noticed, but which would change destinies forever. Vittoria, a 17-year-old girl, blind, since birth, was being led by Seu Geraldo, a middle-aged man with unsteady steps and breath heavy with cheap cachaça. Some said he was her father, others claimed he was a family friend. But the bond between them was more of debt than blood, a relationship marked by abandonment and necessity. Since Vittoria's mother had disappeared in the river waters during a flood that had swept away half the village 5 years earlier, the girl was left to follow the harsh commands of the man who fed her out of obligation, never out of affection. That morning, Seu Geraldo urgently needed a sack of tobacco and a few bottles of cachaça. The harvest had been poor, money was scarce, and gambling debts were accumulating like vultures over his intoxicated conscience. The girl, even without sight, could be of use to someone lonely, he thought, as he pulled her by her thin arm through the marketplace. There were no screams or resistance, just a silent handover, a whispered agreement between men who saw in another's misfortune an opportunity to satisfy vices. Vittoria remained motionless, head bowed, her empty eyes fixed on the ground she couldn't see. Her delicate hands firmly held a small dirty cloth bag where she kept all she possessed, a broken comb that had belonged to her mother, a rosary with worn beads, a small shell that someone had told her came from the sea, that mysterious place she would never know. It was at this moment that Jurandir, a man of Tembe origin who had come to the market to trade medicinal herbs and wild honey for tools and Salt, approached the scene. Tall, with a firm bearing and attentive eyes, Jurandir observed without being noticed, listening to the sordid dialogue that was unfolding. He wasn't a man of many words, having learned early on that among the white men, silence was his best protection. He noticed when the deal was sealed between Seu Geraldo and a corpulent man with an unbuttoned shirt, who made no effort to hide the intention in his cloudy eyes as they traveled over the young woman's fragile body. Without hesitation, Jurandir approached the small group. He placed before them 3 pots of pure honey and a bundle of rare herbs carefully tied. A simple, silent gesture. The men stared at him with surprise, then irritation. "What do you want, Indian?" grumbled the corpulent man. Jurandir pointed to the young woman, then to his offering. Seu Geraldo, realizing that the value offered by Jurandir exceeded what had been previously agreed upon, accepted the exchange with a shrug. What mattered to him was getting his tobacco and his drink. As for the girl's fate, that was someone else's problem now. The corpulent man protested, but Seu Geraldo was already moving away as if relieved of a burden, and Jurandir, with a look that required no explanation, made the other man back down. Vittoria didn't understand what had happened. She only felt that she was being led by different hands, calloused but firm hands that didn't pull her roughly, only indicated the way. "Where are we going?" she asked with a trembling voice, accustomed to rarely being answered. She received no immediate response, but perceived that they were moving away from the hubbub of the market. The smell gradually changed. The odor of food and human sweat gave way to the aroma of leaves, moist earth, and running water. The sounds also transformed. The noise of the crowd yielded to birdsong and the gentle murmur of a nearby stream. They walked for almost 2 hours. Vittoria occasionally stumbled on the exposed roots of the path, but Jurandir supported her without rush, without irritation. For the first time, she didn't hear sighs of impatience each time her step faltered. When they finally stopped, Vittoria smelled the scent of wood smoke and heard distant voices, children's laughter. "We've arrived at the village," said Jurandir, breaking his silence with a deep, calm voice. "You are safe here." Jurandir's community wasn't large, fewer than 30 families living in harmony with the forest, resisting the constant pressure from loggers and gold miners advancing through the region. They were a people who preserved their traditions while adapting to modern times. Some young people studied in the nearby city, returning with knowledge that helped protect their ancestral lands. Upon arrival, there was no commotion. Jurandir led Vittoria to a simple but airy hut and left without saying anything more. Shortly after, she felt the approach of light footsteps and the aroma of herbs she didn't recognize. "I am Irakema," introduced a female voice, elderly but vigorous. "You must be hungry and tired. Come, let's give you a bath and food." Irakema's hands were gentler than any Vittoria had ever experienced. The old healer of the village had in her touch the wisdom of one who knew the power of kindness. She helped the young woman bathe in the nearby stream, provided her with clean clothes, a simple cotton tunic, and then led her to a meal of fish, manioc, and fresh fruits. During that first day, Vittoria remained in a state of alert, expecting at any moment to be told what she should do to pay for this unexpected welcome. In the first nights, she cried silently, hugging her bag of belongings. She didn't understand what this place was where no one shouted at her, where she didn't smell cachaça, where people announced their arrival before touching her. She even tried to escape on the third night, certain that at some point they would charge her for the food and shelter. She walked blindly through the forest until she fell exhausted next to a tree. She was found at dawn by 2 children at play, Kawa and Mayara, who guided her back not with orders, but by singing and telling stories along the way. The village elders, seeing the persistent fear on the young woman's face, decided to perform a welcoming ritual, something they hadn't done in many moons for someone from outside the tribe. That night, Vittoria was led to the center of the village where the heat of a large bonfire warmed the circle formed by the entire community. Even without seeing, she could feel the presence of many people around her, hear their breathing, perceive. Their attention turned to her. The initial fear gave way to a strange calm when the drums began to sound, marking the rhythm of ancestral songs that she didn't understand, but that somehow touched her soul. Irakema approached, placing her hands on her shoulders while explaining in a serene voice, "Each person here will offer you something, not as payment, but as a welcome. This is how we say you are part of us now." One by one, the members of the village approached. A child placed in her hands a small wooden sculpture. "A bird," the boy explained. A woman offered her a necklace. "Jay of seeds that," she said, kept nightmares away. An elder brought an herbal infusion for her to drink, explaining that it would open her other senses to compensate for her absent vision. Each gift came accompanied by kind words, and each touch was respectful, announced, different from anything Vittoria had known in her life. At the end of the ritual, when everyone had already made their gesture, Jurandir approached. It was the first time he had addressed her since arriving at the village. "From today on you will be called Jandira," he said with his deep voice. "It means she who feels the heart of the forest. It is a name of respect among our people." Vittoria, now Jandira, felt something strange happen inside her, an emotion she couldn't name, but which filled her eyes, always empty of expression, with tears. Many in the village also cried, not out of sadness, but because of the power of what was being repaired there, a wounded soul finding shelter, a human being regaining dignity. That night, for the first time in years, she slept without fear. Days in the village turned into weeks and weeks into months. Jandira learned to map the world in a way she had never imagined possible. Her hands, once hesitant, now precisely, identified the medicinal herbs that Irasima patiently taught her to recognize by aroma, texture, and shape. Her ears, always attentive, captured the subtlest of sounds, the beating wings of a hummingbird, the slithering of a snake among dry leaves, the foretelling of rain long before the first drops touched the ground. "You hear what many with eyes cannot perceive," Irasima would say, as she guided Jandira's fingers over a freshly collected plant. "Eyes sometimes lie, but the heart of the forest always speaks the truth to those who know how to listen." The adaptation, however, didn't happen without difficulties. There were nights when nightmares visited her, dreams where Sir Geraldo returned to fetch her, where rough hands dragged her back to the world of shouts and contempt. On these occasions, she would wake up breathless, her body covered in cold sweat, her hands clutching the seed necklace she had received during the ritual. One dawn, after a particularly intense nightmare, Jandira left the hut and walked to the nearby stream. She sat on the bank, letting the cool water touch her feet while trying to calm her breathing. That's when she felt a silent presence beside her. "The nightmares will diminish," said Jorandir, sitting at a respectful distance. "It takes time for the soul to heal." It was rare for him to speak so much. Since the day he had brought her to the village, he had remained close enough to help when necessary, but distant enough not to intimidate her. He would bring firewood to her hut, leave fresh fruits, fix the thatched roof before she even noticed a leak. He never demanded anything in return. "Why did you bring me here?" asked Jandira, the question she had held for months. "What do you expect from me?" Jorandir was silent for a few moments, as if carefully choosing his words. "Many moons ago, I had a daughter," he began, his voice softer than Jandira had ever heard. "She became ill when the white men brought the fever. I couldn't save her." Another long silence. "When I saw you in that marketplace, I didn't just see someone in need of help. I saw how our people could have been treated if we hadn't fought. I saw what happens when we treat people like merchandise." Jandira absorbed those words, letting them penetrate deep into her understanding. It wasn't pity that had motivated Jorandir, but a profound comprehension of the value of human dignity. "I didn't bring you to replace my daughter," he continued. "I brought you because each person deserves to be treated as sacred. It's what our ancestors taught us." It was the longest conversation they had, and after it, something changed in the way Jandira perceived not just Jorandir, but herself. She began to participate more actively in village life. She learned to weave baskets with fibers she identified by touch, to prepare remedies under Irasima's guidance, to sing the ancient melodies that the children taught her with infinite patience. Her presence, initially strange to some, gradually became an integral part of that community. However, beyond the limits of the village, the world continued its relentless course. The region lived under growing tension due to the advance of illegal loggers and gold miners who invaded indigenous lands in search of gold and valuable timber. The government, distant and disinterested, ignored the appeals of traditional communities. On a particularly hot afternoon, the peace of the village was interrupted by the arrival of Paulo, a young warrior returning from the city. A council of elders was immediately convened, which Jandira was allowed to attend, something unusual for someone so recent in the community. "The men of the timber are coming," announced Paulo, his voice laden with urgency. "They've already cut down half of the sacred forest of the Arawete. They say they have documents that the land was sold. They bring machines and armed men." A murmur of concern traveled through the circle. The sacred forest was less than a day's walk from the village. If the loggers advanced, they would soon reach the lands where they lived. Jandira felt fear permeate the air, palpable like the heat emanating from the central fire. "We must fight," said one of the young warriors, indignation evident in his voice. "We have our arrows, we know the forest better than they do." "And how many of ours will die?" questioned one of the elders. "They have weapons that spit fire. We've seen this before." The debate extended through the night. Jandira listened attentively to each argument, each proposal. Some advocated direct resistance. Others suggested seeking help in the city from organizations that defended indigenous rights. There were even those who proposed abandoning the village moving to more distant lands. Jurandir remained silent, as was his custom, listening more than speaking. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of experience. If we fight with violence, we will be painted as savages. If we flee, we will lose not only our land, but our dignity. We need a path that doesn't destroy us. The council ended without a definitive decision. In the days that followed, tension hovered over the village like a storm about to break. Men took turns keeping watch at the borders of the indigenous land. Women prepared bags with non-perishable food and medicines, ready for an escape if necessary. The children, perceiving the gravity of the situation, played more quietly, always close to their parents. Jandira felt fear growing inside her. For the first time since arriving at the village, she feared losing the home she had found. Not just the roof over her head, but the respect, dignity, and belonging she had never known before. One morning, while helping Erasma sort herbs for a protection ritual, she heard the elder sigh deeply. "What is it?" she asked, her hands pausing over the aromatic leaves. "I feel we're forgetting something important," replied the healer. "We faced the timbermen before, many moons ago, when you were not yet among us. There was a man in the city, a defender of the forests, who helped us make our voice reach the great chiefs in Brasilia." "And where is this man now?" questioned Jandira, a thread of hope appearing in her voice. "He departed," said Iracema, using the euphemism her people employed for death. "But he left a son who studied in the big cities. They say he returned and works with the white man's laws, perhaps." The phrase hung in the air like a possibility she feared to explore. That night, Jandira couldn't sleep. She tossed on her mat, thinking about Iracema's words. She felt there was something important in that information, something that could help protect the village that had welcomed her. When the first rays of the sun began to filter through the thatched roof, she made a decision. She sought out Jurandir, and finding him near the stream, explained her idea. Iracema spoke about the son of the forest defender. If he works with the white man's laws, perhaps he can help us legally protect the land. Jurandir listened in silence, his face impassive. After a long pause, he responded, "It's dangerous to seek help in the city. The timbermen have eyes and ears everywhere. More dangerous is waiting for them to reach here," Jandira retorted, with a firmness that surprised them both. "You gave me a home when I had nothing. Let me help protect it." The silence that followed seemed to contain the weight of all the difficult decisions Jurandir had made in his life. Finally, with a sigh that carried both resignation and hope, he agreed. "I will speak with the council. If they approve, Paulo will take you to the city." The council met at dusk. The proposal generated heated debate. Many feared exposing Jandira to danger. Others doubted that a city lawyer could or would really help them. "The whites rarely care about our land," argued one of the elders. "Why would this one be different?" "Because he is the son of one who helped us once," replied Iracema. "His blood carries the memory of his father." After hours of discussion, a consensus was reached. Jandira would go to the city, accompanied by Paulo in search of the lawyer. They would have 5 days to find him and return. According to the scouts, that was the time remaining before the loggers would reach the village lands. The next morning, before the sun was high, Jandira prepared for the journey. She wore borrowed city clothes, jeans and a cotton shirt that seemed strange after months of wearing only traditional tunics. Iracema gave her a small leather bag containing protective herbs and a necklace with a carved wooden amulet. "So that the spirits of the forest guide you back," explained the elder, embracing her tightly. When everything was ready, Jurandir approached. Without words, he extended to Jandira a small leaf-wrapped package. Inside, she found a delicately carved wooden whistle in the shape of a bird. "If you need help, use it," he said simply. "The sound will call both birds and our warriors." Jandira kept the whistle close to her chest, understanding the value of that gift. It was more than an instrument, it was a symbol of trust. Paulo, a young warrior who had studied in the city and spoke Portuguese well, would be her eyes on this journey. "We are ready," he announced, helping Jandira into the canoe that would take them down the river to the city of Santarém, the gateway. to the white man's world, and possibly shelter for the ally they sought. As the canoe glided through the river waters, moving away from the village, Jandira felt a mixture of fear and determination. The countdown had begun. 5 days to find help, 5 days to save the only true home she had ever known. The city of Santarem received Jandira with a chaotic symphony of sounds, smells, and sensations that left her momentarily disoriented. The incessant noise of engines, horns, and raised voices formed a brutal contrast with the natural harmony of the village. The air, heavy with smoke and dust, irritated her lungs accustomed to the purity of the forest. Paulo's hands guided her firmly through the streets of irregular cobblestones, while he described in a low voice what he saw. "We're in the port area. Many boats, people carrying goods. We need to reach the center of the city, where the office is." Harisasha, Jandira felt curious gazes upon her, heard the whispered comments. Indian, blind, words loaded with barely disguised prejudice. She clutched more tightly the small bag of herbs Irasima had given her, seeking courage in the recent memories of the village. The first day in the city was one of reconnaissance and frustration. The name they sought, Bernardo Mendez, son of the late environmentalist Fernando Mendez, seemed to provoke various reactions in the people they approached. Some showed respect, others distrust. Many simply claimed not to know him. "He is not well regarded by certain groups," explained Paulo, as they shared a simple meal in a small boarding house where they had found shelter. "The loggers and miners consider him an enemy. This makes our search difficult." 2 days passed without significant progress. Jandira felt anxiety growing with each wasted hour. 2 days wasted, only 3 remaining before the loggers would reach the village lands. On the morning of the 3rd day, a lead emerged through the owner of the boarding house, Donna Conceição, an elderly lady who had overheard their conversations. "This Bernardo you're looking for," she said as she served. "Strong coffee in aluminum mugs, usually frequents the municipal library on Wednesday afternoons. He gives free legal assistance to those who cannot pay. Today is Wednesday, isn't it?" The information rekindled hope. Paulo and Jandira headed to the library as soon as lunch was over. The old building, constructed during the golden age of rubber, emanated a characteristic smell of old paper and polished wood that Jandira recognized immediately upon entering. Paulo led her to a more reserved area, where, according to a helpful employee, the lawyer usually attended to people. "He hasn't arrived yet," the woman informed them, "but you can wait there. He usually appears after 2 in the afternoon." The wait seemed endless. Jandira, seated in a wooden chair that creaked with every movement, mentally counted the seconds, transforming them into minutes that dragged on. Paulo walked back and forth, occasionally stopping to observe through the window the movement in the square in front of the library. When they finally heard footsteps approaching, it was already past 3 in the afternoon. "Good afternoon," said a masculine voice, young but loaded with authority. "I am Bernardo Mendez. They told me you're looking for me." Paulo stepped forward, quickly explaining the situation: the threatened village, the advancing loggers, the urgent need for legal intervention. Bernardo listened in silence, occasionally asking objective questions about the exact location, existing documentation, previous incursions. His voice revealed no emotion, only professional interest in the case. "And why did you two specifically come?" he finally asked, a note of curiosity emerging in his tone. Paulo hesitated, looking at Jandira. She felt it was the moment to intervene. She stood up, orienting herself by the lawyer's voice. "My name is Jandira," she began, using the name she had received in the village. "Before I was Vittoria, a blind girl sold at a fair by a man who claimed to be my father. Jurandir bought me, not to use me but to give me freedom." The words came out firm, without trembling. "The village welcomed me when no one else wanted anything to do with me. They gave me a name, dignity, a purpose. Now they are about to lose everything to men who see the forest only as money. Your father helped them once. I am here to ask you to do the same." A heavy silence followed her words. Jandira could feel the tension in the air, the lawyer's altered breathing, the creaking of the chair when he moved. "My father died defending causes like this," Bernardo finally said, his voice softer. He was murdered on the orders of loggers 6 years ago. They found his body in the river, with marks of torture. Another pause. Since then I have walked carefully, choosing battles I can win, avoiding direct confrontations, surviving to fight another day. Jandira felt her heart tighten. That sounded like a polite refusal. We don't have another day, she countered, urgency escaping in her voice. In 2 days the machines will reach the village. What would you do if it were your father's ashes buried in that land? The words hit Bernardo like a physical blow. Jandira could feel the change in the energy emanating from him, the deep sigh he released before responding. My father's ashes were scattered in the river as he requested, he said in a controlled voice, but I understand what you mean. The sound of papers being handled filled the momentary silence. I need to see the land documentation. Do you have anything? Official demarcation, historical record, anything that proves traditional occupation. Paolo explained that they had brought a map drawn by the elders, showing the traditional boundaries of the indigenous land, and copies of a demarcation process initiated years earlier but never concluded. Bernardo examined the documents with professional attention. This might be enough for an injunction, he concluded after a long analysis. It's not a guarantee of victory, but it could paralyze operations while the case proceeds. A thread of hope appeared on the horizon. Bernardo, however, made a point of clarifying the risks. I need you to understand, by doing this, I will be challenging powerful people who did not hesitate to kill my father. It won't just be a judicial process, it will be a declaration of war. The war has already begun, responded Jandira with simplicity. We are just choosing our weapons. The rest of that afternoon was dedicated to legal formalities. Bernardo drafted petitions, collected signatures, prepared documents to file in court early the next morning. He worked with silent efficiency, occasionally asking Paolo for clarification on specific details about the indigenous land. When they finished, it was already night. Go back to where you're staying, instructed the lawyer. Tomorrow morning, at 8, meet me at the courthouse. If all goes well, we'll get the injunction before noon. At the boarding house, Jandira could barely sleep. She tossed and turned on the narrow bed, thinking about the village, about Jurandir, about the children she now called friends. She thought about the risk they were taking, about the time that was slipping through her fingers like water. And she thought about Bernardo, about the weight he carried, about the courage needed to follow in the footsteps of a martyred father. The next morning, precisely at 8 o'clock, they met Bernardo on the courthouse steps. His voice conveyed professional confidence, but Jandira, sensitive to sound nuances, perceived the underlying tension. Let's go in, he said. The judge is already aware of the urgency of the case. The following hours were of anguished waiting, in a cold marble corridor where the echo of footsteps and conversations formed a confusing cacophony for Jandira's acute ears. Paolo remained by her side, describing in whispers the environment, the people passing by, the expressions on Bernardo's face when he occasionally came out of the courtroom to update them. Close to noon, the lawyer returned with accelerated steps. We've succeeded, he announced, his voice controlled but with an undeniable tone of triumph. The judge granted the injunction. Deforestation operations must be suspended immediately until an official inspection of the area is carried out and the demarcation process is concluded. Jandira felt a wave of relief course through her body. Her hands, which had been tightly holding Erasima's amulet, finally relaxed. Does this mean the village is saved? She asked, needing confirmation. For now, responded Bernardo honestly. The injunction is just the first step. The loggers may appeal, they may ignore the court order, they may... He left the phrase hanging in the air, as if not wanting to put the worst scenarios into words. The important thing now is to get this injunction to them before they advance further. The next problem presented itself immediately. How to deliver the court order to the border of the indigenous land in time. The court officer designated could only go the next day, and even then would need a police escort, which was rarely made available quickly for remote areas. We don't have that time, said Paolo, concern evident in his voice. The scouts reported that the machines would arrive tomorrow at noon. If we wait for the officer, it will be too late. Bernardo reflected for a few moments, his face contracted, in concentration. Then he made a decision that surprised them both. I'll go with you. I'll deliver the injunction personally. The return journey was a race against time. They left Santarém in the early afternoon in a small but speedy boat that Bernardo had managed to rent. The engine roared as they cut through the river waters, avoiding submerged logs and treacherous sandbars. Night caught up with them still on the river, forcing them to slow down, navigating under the weak light of the waning moon. Jandira felt the tension in Paulo's muscles as he handled the boat, and in Bernardo's occasional silence, interrupted only to check the direction or comment on some obstacle ahead. When the sun began to rise, they were already close to the point where they should leave the river and continue by land. They docked in a small clearing known to Paulo, who quickly organized the supplies necessary for the final walk. We're about 3 hours from the village, he informed them. If we maintain a good pace, we'll arrive before noon. The path through. The forest was difficult even for those who could see. For Jandira, it was a constant test of trust and endurance. Her hands firmly held a staff that Bernardo had improvised from a resistant branch, while her bare feet, she had abandoned her city shoes in the boat, felt every variation in the terrain, every exposed root, every loose stone. From time to time, the lawyer, impressed with her determination, offered help that she politely declined. In the village, she explained with a slight smile, I learned to walk through the forest using other senses. The ground speaks to me through my feet. They had been walking for almost 2 hours when Paulo, who was in the lead, stopped abruptly. Listen, he whispered. Tense. In the silence that followed, they perceived it, a distant mechanical rumble muffled by the density of the forest, but unmistakable. Chainsaws, identified Bernardo, his voice grave. And by the sound, they're not far away. The group quickened their pace, now driven by even greater urgency. The sound of the machines became increasingly clear, occasionally accompanied by shouts of command, and the thunder of century-old trees meeting the forest floor. When they finally reached the edge of a freshly opened clearing, the scene that Paulo described to Jandira was desolate. 3 large tractors, dozens of men with chainsaws, ancient trees felled forming a vegetable cemetery. We're at the border of the indigenous land, murmured Paulo. They've already cut about 200 meters into our territory. Bernardo took command of the situation. He adjusted the tie he had insisted on wearing even in the forest, checked that the documents were protected in the waterproof folder, and stepped forward. Stay here, he instructed. I'll speak with the person in charge. Jandira felt fear tighten her chest as she heard Bernardo's footsteps moving away. Paulo narrated what he saw, the lawyer walking firmly toward a corpulent man who seemed to be coordinating the operation. The workers gradually stopping their activities to observe the intruder in a worn suit with a folder in hand. The initially tense conversation with abrupt gestures from the coordinator. He's showing the documents, continued Paulo. The man seems angry. He's calling someone else. A second man has arrived, seems to be the real boss. The minutes that followed were of extreme tension. Jandira clutched the wooden whistle that Jorandir had given her, ready to use it at the first sign of danger. She heard raised voices, though she couldn't distinguish specific words. Then Paulo let out a muffled exclamation. They're getting aggressive. They pushed Bernardo. He fell. They're tearing up the documents. Without thinking twice, Jandira brought the whistle to her lips and blew with all the strength of her lungs. The sharp, melodious sound cut through the forest air like an arrow, echoing among the trees, reverberating in waves that seemed to reach impossible distances. For an instant, everything seemed to freeze. Voices silenced. Machines stopped. Then, as if in response to an ancestral call, the sky above the clearing darkened with the flight of hundreds of birds of all species, coming from all directions, creating a whirlwind of wings and cries that descended upon the invaders in an impressive manifestation of the power of nature. And it wasn't just the birds that responded to the call. From the shadows of the forest, silent as the morning mist, emerged the warriors of the village. They didn't come with bows or spears raised, but their presence emanated an ancestral authority that made the workers instinctively back away. Jurandir led the group, his face painted with the sacred symbols of protection, his firm steps making it clear that this land had guardians. Behind him, forming a perfect semicircle, were the men and women of the village, some young warriors, others white-haired elders, all united by the same silent determination. The birds continued their circular flight above the clearing, as if drawing a living border in the sky. The roar of the machines had completely ceased, replaced by a tense silence broken only by the occasional beating of wings. Bernardo rose from the ground where he had been pushed, collecting the torn fragments of the court injunction. His suit was dirty with earth, but his bearing remained dignified as he addressed the operation's boss again. As I was saying before being interrupted, he spoke with a clear and firm voice. This is a court order that prohibits any deforestation activity in this area until the conclusion of the demarcation process. Tearing up official documents is a crime, as is disobeying a judicial determination. The corpulent man, whom Paulo had identified to Jandira as Ademar Brito, a known land grabber in the region, looked around evaluating the situation. His men, although armed with chainsaws and some shotguns, seemed uncomfortable with the imminent confrontation. The birds, the silent indigenous people, the determined lawyer, all of this deviated from the usual script of intimidation that usually worked so well. This doesn't end here, threatened Ademar, spitting out the words. I have documents too, I have authorization. This land has an owner. Yes, responded Jurandir, speaking for the first time, his deep voice reverberating in the clearing. This land has had guardians for more generations than your papers can count, and it will continue to have them. Jandira, who had remained beside Paulo at the edge of the forest, felt the vibration in the air, not just the human confrontation, but something deeper, as if the earth itself was observing the clash, waiting to see who would respect it. Without warning, she moved to the center of the clearing, her staff finding the way between roots and fallen trunks with surprising precision. The gazes turned to her, the blind young woman who walked with confidence toward the invisible line that separated invaders and defenders. My name is Jandira, she announced, stopping exactly in the middle of the contested space. I cannot see what you have done here, but I can feel it. I can hear the cry of the fallen trees. I can feel the pain of the exposed earth. Her voice, normally soft, now carried an authority that surprised even those who knew her. This forest welcomed me when I was treated as merchandise. It taught me that nothing that breathes should be sold or destroyed out of greed. She turned in the direction where she felt Ademar's presence. Your money doesn't buy dignity, sir. Your machines don't build respect. When the last river is contaminated and the last tree is cut down, you will discover that you cannot breathe money. The silence that followed had weight, density. Even the birds seemed to momentarily suspend their circular flight. Ademar looked at the blind young woman, then at the impassive warriors, at the lawyer with the torn documents in his hands, at his own men who avoided his gaze. Slowly, the mathematics of the confrontation took shape in his mind. It wasn't just the numbers or the weapons, but the moral weight of the situation, the real possibility that this time, brute force and money would not be enough. You have until tomorrow to remove these machines, he finally said, his harsh voice trying to disguise the temporary defeat. I'm going to verify these documents. If there's any irregularity... He left the threat hanging in the air as he made an abrupt gesture to his men, who began to shut down equipment and gather tools. The withdrawal of the invaders was slow, tense, punctuated by hostile glances and veiled promises of return. No one relaxed until the last truck disappeared on the trail opened in the forest, the rumble of the engines gradually diminishing until it was swallowed by the distance. Only then did the village allow itself to celebrate, not with shouts or dances, but with a collective sigh of relief, silent embraces, discreet tears of gratitude. Jandira felt gentle hands on her shoulders. Jurandir, who rarely demonstrated physical affection. You brought the voice of truth, he said simply. That is worth more than any paper. Bernardo, still holding the fragments of the injunction, approached the group. "This is not the end," he warned, ever the pragmatist. "They will return with more documents, perhaps with a counter-court order. We need to legally strengthen our case." The elders agreed, inviting the lawyer to return to the village and discuss the next steps. The small group walked in silence along the trail that led to the heart of the indigenous land, leaving behind the wounded clearing, the fallen. Trees like warriors fallen in battle. Jandira, guided by the sound of footsteps ahead of her, felt each change in the environment, the air becoming fresher as they entered the preserved forest, the smell of moist earth and medicinal plants, the song of birds that had returned to their habitual perches. In the village, they were received with a mixture of contained joy and persistent concern. The news spread quickly. The injunction, the confrontation, the temporary withdrawal of the loggers. Irasema, who had been anxiously awaiting Jandira's return, embraced her with strength surprising for her elderly arms. "The spirits of the forest spoke through you," whispered the elder in her ear. "I saw it in a dream last night." That night, as a simple but abundant meal was shared around the central fire, Bernardo explained to the village leaders what needed to be done. The torn injunction could be replaced, but it was only temporary protection. To ensure the permanent safety of the land, it would be necessary to reactivate and accelerate the official demarcation process, collect more evidence of traditional occupation, prepare a complete dossier on the cultural and environmental importance of the area. "It won't be easy," he concluded, accepting a gourd of chibe offered by one of the women. "We're facing powerful interests, but I have contacts. In Brasilia, colleagues who believe in justice as I do. We can succeed." Jurandir, who had listened attentively to every word, nodded with gravity. "Our fight didn't begin today, nor will it end tomorrow," he said. "Each generation defends the land in its own way. Our ancestors with bows and arrows, we now with papers and words. What's important is that the forest remains standing to tell our story." The indigenous leader's words touched Bernardo deeply. Jandira, attentive to the nuances of the lawyer's breathing and voice, perceived the exact moment when something changed inside him, as if an important decision had been made, a commitment sealed beyond professional obligations. "My father gave his life for this cause," said Bernardo, his voice laden with contained emotion. "I thought I should protect mine, acting with caution, choosing safe battles. Today I understood that some fights are worth the risk." A murmur of approval traveled through the circle. The elders exchanged significant glances. This man from the city, son of a respected ally, was finally finding his own path as a defender of the forest. When the meeting ended and people retired to their huts, Jandira found a moment to talk alone with Bernardo. Seated on a fallen log near the stream, listening to the gentle murmur of running water, they shared their personal stories. She about the life of abuse before being rescued by Jurandir, he about his murdered father and the years of internal struggle between following in his footsteps or seeking safety in anonymity. "When I saw you confront Ademar today," confided Bernardo, "I understood something my father always said. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the decision that something is more important than fear." Jandira smiled, her sightless eyes turned toward the sound of water. "In the village, I learned that we are like trees. Some large, others small, but all connected by the roots. What hurts one affects all. What strengthens one benefits all." In the days that followed, an action plan was developed. Bernardo briefly returned to the city to obtain a new copy of the injunction and initiate the necessary legal procedures. Paulo and other young people from the village were designated to constantly monitor the limits of the indigenous land, alert to any attempt at return by the loggers. The elders began to gather oral histories,